Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for dialing in for our webinar today. My name is Melissa McQueen, and I'm the Executive Director at Transplant Families. At Transplant Families, we help caregivers like you honor your child's gift and donor. Today, we'll be discussing school lunches and featuring transplant nutritionist Courtney Bliss. And we'll also be able to talk with you afterwards. We're so grateful that you are able to join us. Courtney will give a thorough presentation and will conduct a short Q&A at the end of the session. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat window and we'll address them during the Q&A. By the end of our time today, we hope that you feel comfortable and confident about what to send your child to school with for lunches. We're very passionate about pediatric recipient care because we're parents. Our goal is to educate and empower. We have to have a disclaimer to always run medical advice through your transplant team first. Your child may have special circumstances that can be adapted to this plan. Thank you all for joining us today. And now it is my honor to introduce Courtney Bliss, transplant nutritionist.
Okay, so as Melissa and Elias mentioned, I am Courtney Bliss, and we're going to talk about lunches for school for your transplant kids. There we go. All right. Quick disclaimer to piggyback off of what Melissa said. I am a credentialed dietitian, but I am not your child's dietitian. So be sure to run everything by your child's medical team. This webinar is intended just for education, not medical advice. All right, quick little bit about me. I am a mom of 2 boys and 2 rescue pups there. I am a pediatric dietitian with experience in heart transplant, and I previously worked at Phoenix Children's Hospital. As Elias mentioned, I now run my own business where I help families, some transplant families, some non-transplant families, but we always are working towards nourishing our kids with less stress and more confidence. You can find me at feedingbliss.com. I actually have a separate newsletter for transplant families with articles that are more helpful for you all. And you can also find me on Instagram. So first, let's just kind of reframe the importance of nutrition for transplant recipients. We are obviously trying to maintain growth, right? Your child has been through a really traumatic period where they had some degree of inadequate organ function and then this massive surgery, sometimes multiple, and now we're in the recovery process. And so we need to keep them growing so that they can reach their full potential. Another piece of the importance for nutrition is keeping your child and that organ healthy. You likely know that many transplant recipients carry a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes, and diet control, so just being mindful of what we're eating, balancing out those nutrients, can help decrease that risk. Also, we're worried about kind of minimizing the effects of some of the medications. So whether it is micronutrient or vitamin deplenishment from some of the medications we're on, or just those longer term gut changes from being on all of those meds. When it comes to school food, I know that a lot of us have questions. How can I keep my kids safe? How can I make sure that I'm packing a really good meal? So now that we have a quick reminder of why nutrition is important for this population, let's cut to school lunches, which is a huge piece that I know we're all thinking about this time of year. So maybe you are like a lot of the typical transplant families and you want to make sure that you can keep the food safe when you pack it. Or you're worried that you'll pack this lunch for them and they won't eat it, and then they'll be hungry and missing those nutrients. Or maybe using the school menu would be much easier, but you don't know if it's the right choice for your family. Or maybe last year you packed all of their favorite foods, and this year you really don't want to do that, but you want to make sure they're eating. We're going to kind of talk about some of those aspects here and how we can make this year a success for school meals. All right, before we dive into all of the details, I want to encourage you to pause and check out this really important statistic. Your kid's lunch at school represents at most 13% of your child's food intake for the week. If you consider that you are doing 3 meals a day plus 1 snack, and they're eating 5 lunches at school, it's 13% of the 35 meal opportunities. Now, if your kid has more snacks, then it's an even lower percentage. So I want you to take a little bit of the pressure off of making this the perfect lunch and know that it's just one piece of the puzzle. And you are not a failure. You're not a bad mom or dad if you struggle to get your kid to eat what you send, or if you're feeling unsure about what you should serve, or if you should do the school lunch. So just give yourself a little bit of a break. And remember, this is just one piece of the puzzle that we're working on today. Okay, now that we have that behind us, let's consider the 2 options here, right? So you either can eat the lunch food that the school provides, or you can pack something from home. Now, if you choose school food, it might be easier, right? You don't have to pack anything. You don't have to remember to buy extra supplies or to empty their lunch back and get the ice pack fully frozen the night before, right? You just have to make sure that they are physically at school to eat the food. That's really it. School food also provides built-in variety. So if you guys get into a food rut, this could be a good option because they have a rotating cycle. They're not going to serve the same thing every day. They don't have the same fruits and vegetables each day. They have to change it. It may actually be a really healthy option for your child. And we'll talk more about that on the next slide. Another really good feature for transplant families here is the temperatures are very closely controlled and they have less of a travel distance. So you don't have to worry about keeping it safe while they are in their backpacks, right? In the classroom and before lunchtime. Potentially, it could take a little bit longer for them to get their food and they could have less time to eat because they have to wait in line. But we have some options for that we'll talk about later too. Now let's look at school from home, or lunch from home. So when you pack a lunch, you have more control over the ingredients and the components that you're serving. You will need extra accessories for serving and for keeping it cool. It's more comfortable for your kids typically, right? Because it's going to look more like what you would serve throughout the rest of the day or on the weekends. So that could be a plus. You have to make sure that you can keep it within a safe temperature range for the extent of the period. Like, so when it leaves the house, leaves the fridge, to when they get to eat it, you have to be more mindful of what you're using and where it's being stored. So there's pros and cons to each option, and for each family, it's going to be a very different answer. And the other piece I want you to know is you don't have to choose only one the whole time. There's a lot of ways where you can do a combination of both and feel like you're making the safest and best choice for your family. So remember, we're not talking in black and whites here. All right, this is a very brief overview of federal nutrition standards because I know many of you have not been educated on this, and why should you? So here's the deal. The federal government has standards on what foods should be and can be served at public schools or at daycares and after-school programs. So it falls under who gets money from the government. So typically it's public schools or lower income daycares, but it's not only those. What you should do is talk to your school and find out if they qualify for CACFP, which is for daycares and after-school programs, or if they fall under the federal nutrition standards for schools. If either of those are the case for your school, then it could be a really healthy option for your kids. Here's what this means. It has protections for the food safety guidelines that are followed. It has protections for what food groups and serving sizes are being served at every meal. So breakfast, snacks, lunches, all of it. It has rules around the quality of the ingredients and the nutrition content, specifically saturated fat, sodium, fiber, and added sugars. So that means that the school has already done that work for you. It's already compared products and found something that fits these more heart healthy standards. So it's kind of like a check, right? You only need to know, all right, it's what they're serving, so it complies. One thing that I hear come up is, but they're serving my kid like Cocoa Puffs or chicken nuggets. And on the surface, yes, that is what's happening. But it is not the same foods that you would get from the grocery store. So these large manufacturers, think Tyson Chicken, think General Mills, they have contracts with the government to produce school foods. So they have a separate run of products that meet those saturated fat, sodium, fiber, and sugar requirements, but they're just packaged as these approachable foods that the kids are used to. So it could be a really good option. If you have any questions about that, you can look up the federal nutrition standards and you can read in more detail what the specific requirements are for your child's age range once you find out if your school complies. So, like I said, it's brief. We could do an entire hour-long series on this, but just so you have some background to support whether or not school food is a good option for your kids. All right. So let's look at what we should think about when we're getting ready to pack our lunches. We want to make sure we're providing multiple food groups because every time our transplant child eats, it's an opportunity to fuel their bodies, to support proper blood sugar control, to get really great vitamins and minerals in them, to give them energy for the next chunk of their day. And so sticking with different food groups can be a really easy way to kind of check that off. Like, I'm providing a good balance here. So your fiber, your fruits, and your veggies is one component we want to make sure we're offering. Your protein, obviously a very important piece. And then also fat, because fat is such an important molecule to support hormone development, growth, muscle function, right? There's so many roles for fat in just our bodies. So don't leave that one out. Also, how can we make it fun? If possible, adding colors or different textures. And this can be as simple as, okay, so maybe you bought green grapes and you bought cucumbers, you bought carrots, and you bought blueberries. So maybe it's just a quick thing of, okay, I'm not going to do green grapes and cucumbers on the same day because I want to have some different color there, right? So it doesn't have to be super in-depth, but just what would look fun and inviting when we open their lunchbox, okay? All right, what else do we consider? Temperature control. If you remember anything from the initial education that you got from your dietitian at the hospital, it was probably don't touch pomegranate, don't touch grapefruit, and please keep things at the safe temperature, right? Those are our big three, which you walk away with that, we have a good starting block. So you have 4 hours for a food to be outside of the temperature danger or outside of the good temperature range. So the problem temperatures are between 40 degrees and 140 degrees, okay? So I'm not going to tell you to insert a thermometer into your child's food and send it to school with them to check it. That's obsessive and we don't need to go that far. But just know, if you have the ice packs in the freezer for 12 hours overnight and your food is in the fridge until 5 minutes before they leave and they eat 3 hours after they get to school with 2 ice packs, you're good. You're really okay. Unless it's out in the heat and it's uncovered and you take the ice packs out of there, you're going to be okay. I know we've terrified you, and I'm sorry we've terrified you, but it's to keep you guys safe. So, bit of a frame of reference. If you have a longer window where you're like, oh, I'm kind of up against that 4-hour window with my kids' mealtime. That could be a really great time to talk to the school. So if your child is on an IEP or a 504 plan, many of them can have a meal protection piece added in. So it's access to safe and accessible food. And so we can build in like use of a fridge into that. So number one, if your child has an IEP or a 504 plan, check and see if that's something that's covered. And if it is, make sure we're enforcing that. Okay. If your child does not have one of those, talk to the school and say, hey, look, this is a tight window for us. And this is something I need to help keep my transplant child safe. Many times they will meet you where you're at, right? But you also have a transplant team who can write a friendly little note and try and do some extra encouragement to make it more accessible for your child. Other things to consider when you're packing your lunches: no pomelos, no grapefruit, no pomegranate, no foods they're allergic to, right? No foods their speech therapist hasn't cleared them for, all of the basics. Side note, I have an entire article on hidden sources of some of these danger foods that Melissa is going to share. So if you want to dive a little bit deeper into where it could be lurking, so think like Sunny D sometimes, or some of those other drink products, I have a cheat sheet for you. So be sure to go check that out. All right, so those are some of the things we consider, right? Now we're going to get into what I'm sure a lot of you are interested in, which is, okay, but what do I actually pack? If I don't do deli meat, what do I do? So we're going to head in. I have 6 great ideas for you guys that you can screenshot, or you'll get access to these after, and we can get started. Okay, so also just a quick reminder, if their lunch doesn't look like this, you're still awesome. They're still healthy, okay? It's beautiful and it's fun for a picture, but there's so many ways to have a healthy lunch that don't look like this, okay? All righty, unconventional lunch ideas. Number 1, a bagel thin with cream cheese, some hard-boiled eggs, cucumber slices, and strawberries. So look, we have different textures, we have different colors. Maybe your kid loves carbs and a bagel is going to be like, yes. Don't fight that. Meet them where they're at and make them more approachable to everything else. Hard-boiled eggs, awesome meal prep item. Cook them every couple days, and use your ice packs. You'll keep it the right temperature, but you've got a quick protein source that doesn't change when it's been out of the fridge for a little bit. You know, those texture changes for some kids are a big problem. What about whole wheat crackers with nut or seed butter, some apple slices, and some snap peas? Maybe your kiddo is not really a fan of the fresh snap peas. You can even do those dried ones, right? They're still going to get protein, iron, and fiber from them, and they're still crunchy. Another option is a homemade bean dip or store-bought. Don't have to make it all. Quesadilla with or without some cooked chicken or meat, blackberries, and carrots. You see, we have lots of different colors here. We have sweet, we have crunchy. We're balancing it all out. All right, 3 more for you. Crackers, cottage cheese, tomatoes, avocado, and grapes. You've got some really good healthy fat there. You've got awesome protein. You have fiber. You have it all. And it's kind of like a snacky option if your kid is one who would rather kind of pick and choose. Next, we have a chicken salad that you can make instead of using a mayo. I am not a mayo fan. Some of your kids are, that's fine. But you can do equal parts avocado and yogurt and mix it all together, and then put the chicken and celery and whatever other ingredients you like in your chicken salad in there and put it on a little sandwich, right? It's super fun. Use your rotisserie chicken. They get some more protein in there. And then this one I put with cucumber and apple slices. Just colorful, delicious. Another option I love would be lettuce wraps. So maybe your kid loves that ground meat with a little bit of sauce, right? And they wrap it up in the lettuce. Great. make that, you can make the meat. And what you can do to make it more food safe friendly is freeze it in smaller portions, right? So if you make a big batch, freeze it smaller. So when you take it out, you have 1 or 2 lunches at a time. That way you can use it within those 48 hours and not have to cook everything fresh every 2 days, because that's a pain. You guys have too much going on. And then for this, I just paired it with pears, but play with it. Whatever's fresh, whatever is easy to grab from the pantry or the fridge, but make sure that there's a little bit of a different texture to it. Okay, so those are some non-deli meat lunch ideas. Now we're going to talk about deli meats. Here's the deal. For the general population, the fear around deli meats is the connection with nitrates and nitrites and overall cancer risk, heart health, all of that. Valid. We have a lot of research on those as not the best options every day for our child, okay? Or for us. But when we add in transplant to it, it's actually a pretty big food safety risk. And that's why we, as transplant providers, typically recommend against having them, because it is just easier to say, let's skip those and not introduce that risk for our children. However, if your team is allowing you to have it or it's part of your regular diet, ways we can decrease the risk is by purchasing smaller portions more frequently and by heating it up to 145 degrees for 15 seconds. Okay, so that will kill the risk of foodborne pathogens and still let you enjoy it safely for your child. In general, like I said, it's not something we recommend, but every child and every family is so unique. So definitely talk to your transplant team about this and figure out what the best path is for your child. Okay. Now let's talk the fun stuff. How do we store it all? What do we put it in? All of that. So there are endless products out there that you can use to pack lunches. They are fun, they are colorful, they are a far cry from the brown paper bags that many of us had growing up. But there's options. And with Amazon One Click, they come real fast. So there are brands that I like, but they are not the only way to go about feeding your transplant kid. So that's the big disclaimer for this slide. These are options. These are not the only way to do it. So things like Bento Go and Planet Box are fun because they go in the dishwasher, which is a lifesaver for parents everywhere. They get nice and hot and steamed clean. And they have lots of different colors and you can personalize. The other option is Mr. Dakai is a thermal bento box option. So if you had soups or stews or things like that you wanted to keep hot, it's a stainless steel insulated option that you could do. There's lots of brands that do it. Mr. Dakai is just one of them. But know that, like, if your kid really prefers hot lunches and you want to send them, then it might make sense to invest in some of those options if they're not going to be able to microwave their food. But know that there's so many different ways to do this. So that's number one. Number two, make sure that we're providing them with utensils that are like the right size for their hands. Sometimes we give them the plastic forks or spoons, but they're full adult size. And if they're little hands, they can't manipulate it the same way. And they're going to be less efficient eating and they're going to give up faster, which means they'll get less of what they need in, even if they're hungry. So Amazon, IKEA, Target, they have smaller size ones that are perfect for their hands, fit nicely in the lunchbox, but it can just make the meal a little bit easier and more enjoyable for them. Next, I love the thin ice packs. Here's why. It covers more surface area and it'll fit in the lunchbox. So you can do, let's say you did the Bento Go or the Planet Box. You could do one ice pack on the bottom, your Bento box or your Planet Box in there, and then another thin ice pack on top. you know for certain that that temperature is going to be nice and cool and consistent. It's not going to be just the one side where the big ice pack is touching. You'll kind of have that surface coverage, which ideally would help you as parents feel more confident in what you're sending and the quality of it when it's time to open the food. Also, sometimes fun accessories make a big difference. I know it's extra work, and so it's always a caveat. But if it means that they eat it and love it, sometimes it's worth just cutting the cucumbers in flower shapes, right? Or making the sandwich into like the little dinosaur cutters. I don't know why it's more fun. It just is more fun. But there are little food picks that they can use, and the different cutters. We want to invite them to enjoy their lunch, right? And to really look forward to it. So I hope those are helpful. Again, there's so many brands out there. And if you already have some stuff, awesome, go for it. Ignore this. But if you are just starting the school process, or maybe the ones you had just aren't in good shape, these could be some things to consider. So, all right, that covers the packing lunch piece. I do always want to let families know that they have another option outside of their transplant centers. So my practice is exclusively pediatrics. Like I said, I do have the experience in transplant, and I am accepting new clients. There's some details here. It is an insurance covered visit, and I can navigate that process with you. I do want you to know that many plans actually have unlimited nutrition visits at 0%. And so it could be a really good option if you want to navigate this a little bit more closely. I know a lot of the visits are in clinic or rushed, right? Or they're super fast. But being able to have a longer period with families is something that I absolutely adore about having my own practice. I can spend an hour talking with families and really giving them a solid plan, because that's what they need, right? So I'll leave that there, and Melissa will share some more information on how to find me, but I'd be remiss if I didn't let you know that more help is available. And finally, let's dive into questions. Let's see what you need.
Thanks everyone for your patience. I'm going to add Courtney with me now. Thank you. Thank you again, Courtney, for being with us and answering all our questions. I'll go to our chat box. Oh yeah, we're just so happy to have you, because, we have a nutritionist oftentimes when our kids are younger. A lot of our kids are transplanted when they're babies, and we get all that information, either just learning how to eat or tube feeding. But then later on, when they're in school, it's just not the same. They don't get a lot of the same support that we used to get. And so we miss it quite a bit. So that's why we're so thankful to have you with us. And hopefully, I think we've talked about this before, we can make this a series where we can have lots of different topics for our older kids, because you just don't know. So I am seeing some of the chat, but not all of the chat. Have you seen any questions pop up? And if not, I have some.
I didn't see any pop up, but I don't know if it's since I'm on the different slide.
Right. And I'm on a different slide too. So that's what I was thinking as well. I invite everyone to go ahead and chat their questions in the chat panel. And I will be monitoring that the best that I can. But I will go ahead and ask some questions. One of our biggest concerns as transplant parents is that we don't know how much our kids are eating at school. Do you have any tips or tricks on how we can figure out, did they finish their lunch? What's really going on there?
Okay, so we're going to go back to that statistic. It's 13% of their meals. And something we need to focus on, especially as these kids are getting older, is that autonomy, right? And empowering them to make decisions. Some of that is following through with taking their medication, right? You as parents won't be there forever to help encourage that. And so you're building in that responsibility as part of it. I would take that same energy over to meals. So your job is to set them up with a great option, right? So either you decide the school meal is the great option, you know, that when they walk through the line, they have to get a vegetable, they have to get a fruit, they have to get a protein and a grain. They're being given all of the components of a great meal, but it's on them to listen to how much they need. Same thing with a packed lunch. You have this great guidance here of how you can structure things, you offer it to them. If you are starting to feel concerned that they are not eating enough, maybe you are noticing that they're ravenous when they get home, or they're really sleepy. Those would be signs that possibly they're not eating enough during the day. And you have a couple options there. You can chat with them and the school, like, hey, what are you seeing when you're there? Or maybe it is a time issue, like we talked about with doing school food. Maybe they aren't at the front of the line like they should be. And it's just reminding the teacher and the staff, like, I understand everyone's hungry, but like, we need this. I need him to be able to eat, or her. I'm a boy mom, like I said, so he just kind of comes out. I apologize. Or we have to have that conversation with our kids, like, hey, I'm noticing when I pick you up from school, you are so hungry, or maybe we are bordering on hangry and we're a little grumpy. I don't know if your children get that way, but mine do big time. And so we have that open conversation, like, it's really important that you take some bites of the food that I send you with, or that you get from the school, so that you don't feel this way when we get home, right? Because it doesn't feel good to be hangry. No one feels good when they're like that. And so chatting with them, like, how can we help you? Do you feel like you really just want to play, right? You need to get to recess faster, or maybe you need a different utensil, or maybe you're really struggling to open up your lunchbox and we need to practice with that, right? You have to have that conversation with them and figure out, how can I set you up for the best possible scenario? And typically it's having a conversation, reminding them of why it's important that we eat, and then letting them trust that they're going to eat the right amount. We have that conversation of, oh, you didn't feel really good today. I wonder if you did a great job eating your lunch. Do you think that could be contributing? Do you think you could just be hungry? Or they're growing. You know, sometimes they hit that growth spurt and you cannot keep up with how much food you have to give them. And that's the situation where you just go, okay, I know you're eating what I'm sending you, but you're still hungry. And so you shift to be more intentional about the protein and the fat that are included in the foods that you are sending and serving for snacks, so that they have a little bit more buffer to support that increased growth period. Does that answer your question?
It does, and
Okay.
thank you so much. That's actually a really thorough answer and wonderful. I have a follow-up question to
Of
that,
course.
which is, how much liquid should they be drinking in a day? I know that we are in Arizona, but I see from our list people I recognize from all over the country.
Yes.
I know it gets hot everywhere. So
Yeah.
what are the liquid requirements that you would hope to have for, and this is a large range,
Yeah.
obviously. We'll just stay with elementary kids, which is still a large range, K through
Yeah.
8. What would that look like?
So I like to do a couple things here. One, I want to remind you that from a professional side standpoint, when we as providers are deciding how much you need to drink, the second you become a transplant patient, we add on 20% to the standard liquid recommendation. And that is for kidney protection. It's for just maintaining adequate hydration with the medication burden they are on. All of those medications carry they carry implications as far as electrolytes, right? When you go and have your monthly or your weekly blood checks, your potassium, your sodium, your magnesium, those are some of the key electrolytes we're looking at, and it's because they're so closely tied to the medications and your hydration. So What I will say is you're going to need more than an average kid, but the foods that your child eats will contribute to that. So some foods have a higher concentration of liquid or water in them than other foods do. And so if you have a kid who's doing a ton of fruit or a ton of vegetables, they may be getting in a higher amount of liquid from just metabolizing that food. So I like to remind everyone that their pee is their best inclination, which sounds really weird and really strange, but it's a really easy telltale sign. So if your kiddo's pee is the color of apple juice or darker, you need to up that hydration and encourage a little bit more. If it's around the color of lemonade, you're in good shape. So quick and easy little way. And that's even something when I work with my clients, if a kid is 5 or older, I have that conversation with them, and that becomes something for them to take ownership of, right? Because we can remind them, hey, take a sip of water, take a sip of water, take a sip of water until we're blue in the face. But they don't follow through, right? They hear about half of what we say to them. So if you can give them that guidance of, okay, you are big enough to use the bathroom on your own now. I need you to pay attention. If your pee looks like apple juice, which most kids know apple juice versus lemonade colors, right? Those are pretty easy to distinguish. Then the first thing you do after you wash your hands after the bathroom is you need to go take a good sip of water. If it looks like lemonade, you're in good shape. Keep it up. So in general, if your elementary school kid is coming home with an 8-ounce bottle of water that they have not finished, I feel strongly you got to increase it. But outside of that narrow range, I like the pee test. It's so much easier. They can do it without telling anyone about it. And they can really pay close attention to their body that way.
That's great. I love it. So along those lines, and tell me if you see anything pop up in the chat. I might miss it on my end.
Yeah.
What are, if we're always training our kids to advocate for themselves, and that starts from an early age. We know to tell them to drink, lots of fluids and to eat good food, but how do they know in a lunchroom what foods to avoid? Do you have any tricks for telling them how to avoid things that might have hidden sources of grapefruit in it?
Well, the list that we gave is great. Most of those foods, if they are a school that's participating in CACFP or in the federal nutrition standards, it shouldn't be a problem. The other piece is it would be treated as an allergy. So when you talk to the school kitchen, right, that director knows these are your foods. They would be able to tell you, they'd be able to tell your child, you cannot have these foods. These have a contamination in them. So that would be my easiest way, is having an open line of communication with the school kitchen. Let them know, like, this is what we cannot have. This is the importance of it. And they can figure out, maybe there is a certain menu or dish that they serve. I'm just going to throw something out. Maybe it's like cranberry pork. And the kitchen knows that the sauce that comes with that has some pomegranate in it. And so you would know anytime that cranberry pork comes up on the school menu, they either need to take the vegetarian option, which is usually like a sun butter and jelly, or that's a day you pack a lunch. I think that's a nice thing, like I said, about the cycle menus, is you have built-in flexibility and rotation, but it repeats. So okay, they're using the same food for these certain things. Anytime I see that on the list, we have to pass. So that would be, I think, the easiest way to go about it in the kitchen. And for a younger kid, probably just telling them, I need you to only eat what I send you with, until mom or dad knows what that other option is. it has to come from me. So maybe the school has a separate little snack station that some of the kids can order from. That's a separate email or a phone call for you to make to the school. Like, hey, can you tell me what you're offering there so I can narrow it down for my kid and know these are safe options for them, these are not. So then they can still participate, but in a safe way.
That's great. I have two more questions for you.
Yep.
First is regarding water. So now one of the, I guess, silver linings of our whole like situation with, you know, social distancing and everything else is that water fountains really aren't around anymore, and it's a lot of refill stations, which is fantastic. What are your thoughts on safety for if there are water fountains still, or as opposed to refill stations, and you know, like how do you encourage your kids to use those?
Yeah, I think the refill stations are clearly a better option because you can get it without anyone's mouth having been near it. Right? It would take some impressive acrobatics to get your mouth over to the refill station. Just a whole different thing. But I think that just saying like this, you have to remind them that you feel confident and safe, so they do. I speaking as a provider and seeing some of the relationships with food, it's very clear that there is a fear around food for kiddos, and some of that was because the parents are you're so protective, right? Because you have to let them out into the world, but you don't really want to, and you don't know where some of these things are hiding. And so just showing them like these options are really good and safe for you. You can always feel comfortable refilling here. Here's how to use it. These ones that have a mouthpiece are not really a great option, and we should try and find another water source for you.
That's great. I try to have a fun water bottle that has my son's name on it, and he's encouraged to use that. And he fills it, tells me I fill it twice a day because he runs cross country and he really wants that. So that's right. He really does. So I'm going to go back on the video to the portion where you talk about services. And we're not going to play the video, but I'm going to show that option. Even though you're based out of Arizona, you serve families nationwide. So your services can be used anywhere, which is fantastic and so needed right now, especially when we all don't have access to a transplant nutritionist after our kids are, 3 or 5 or something like that.
Yeah, and so I feel like a lot of families, it's kind of this stuff. It's I understand the big picture things, but like I am struggling with how I'm making food for 4 people with different appetites and trying to do it safely without losing my mind or catering to, everyone else. And so being able to just say, okay, let's look at that big picture and let's feed as a family. How can we make this work so that no one is having to sacrifice and we're all following that great heart healthy diet and just not having to push too hard.
I love it. So I would definitely encourage everyone to talk to your transplant nutritionist if you can. If you can get time with them, definitely talk to your team and get their recommendations. But also you can contact Courtney. She's well respected within the community and loves to talk about kids and how to help them best get their best nutrition and to grow. So we love that. I'm going to leave this information up. I will have it go out on the after email. So we'll have this information as well, so you know how to get a hold of her. I want to say that next time we were talking about doing, we have all kinds of ideas. We're hoping to have a G-tube nutrition. And then I know, right? Because that's such an important topic. And maybe even what nutrition looks like if your teens, when they get older and they decide they're on a special diet, like, oh, I'm a vegetarian now, So
yes, lots of important things to consider. Absolutely.
Right. So there's a ton of different directions we can go, or even how to optimize your child's meds. Because I'm sure there's some like foods that are better than others for that. So there's all kinds of future topics coming up. Courtney, do you want to have any last words before we sign off?
No, just thank you so much for your time. And I would love to hear what else would be helpful for you. I am regularly writing blog posts, and Melissa and I are working together on putting together some more of these productions. So if there's an area that you feel stuck with, definitely let us know, and we can work on getting you some resources around that. But it was so great, and I hope that you all found it helpful.
I hope so too. Thank you everyone again for your patience. The first webinar on a new platform is always fun, but we got it. We got it through. So we're so happy again that you've joined us. And our next webinar is actually in 2 weeks, and that one is story time. So we hope that you'll join us for story time with transplant families, where we highlight an author that writes a children's book related directly to transplant. So we hope that you and your child will join us so that they can hear Mighty Me by Annalie Navarro. We are so excited to have her with us, and we hope that Courtney will be able to join us again soon. So thank you everyone for your patience, and it looks like we are just at the hour. Thank you all for your time. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. Bye.